So let me know when we're...
You're on.
Great. Welcome everybody at home. And the topic for this evening is going to be about how thoughts come through spirit into soul, and then from soul into the body, and manifest into actual dendrites in the brain. Okay? So I'd like to begin with the scripture, and it's taken from the book of John. Now John, as most people know, whether you're a believer or not, is the fourth gospel in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, right? And Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called synoptic gospels because they basically follow the same format, and they give a synopsis of the birth, the life, and the death of Jesus. The book of John is different in that it focuses mainly on the 3 years of his ministry. There's not the parables in it, and there's a lot of red letter teaching in it from Jesus directly to the people. He uses a lot of I am statements, and he also uses a lot of metaphor. So it's a more direct teaching than the parables. John himself was said to be the most loved disciple of Jesus, which means he was the closest, most closely aligned with love itself. Okay? He was really aligned with God. And so it raises the question, how aligned are we with love? Okay? Are we sideways to it? Are we a little bit, or are we aligned? Okay? And so I heard a great message by Pastor Mimi at All Nations Church that I go to, and she was talking about our relationship with God, our closeness to God, and said, if you think about it, Jesus spoke to the multitudes. There was thousands of people would come and hear him speak, and they had no social media. Nobody was tweeting, nobody was texting. I don't know how they heard about him, but thousands would show up, right? But out of those thousands, maybe it was the same people, they came and went, I don't know. But then 70 were called to really spread the gospel, spread the good news. And out of those 70, 12 were brought into, as disciples, into that inner circle, and they pretty much gave up their lives and just spent their time exclusively with love, okay? And then out of those 12, there was 3 that were called, Peter, James, and John, to go up to the mountain to actually see the transfiguration, to see the glory of God. So they were in the core group of the disciples. But of that little group of 3, John was the one that formed, say, a group of 1, because he was the most aligned with love. And what happened after is John actually got downloaded with the book of Revelations. He was so aligned with love that Source, Creator, was able to go whoom, and download him, and he just wrote that whole book of Revelations. So that's what can happen. The more alignment with God, and I think we've all had those experiences. We might call it being in the flow. You think of somebody, and you walk around the corner and there they are. You think, whoa, how did that happen? Or you need something and you're thinking, wow, I could really, and then there it is. You find it on the street, or you find it in a store or something. It's just like the perfect fit. That's when you're in the flow. That's when you know you're aligned with love, because the miracles just keep happening. Okay? So the scripture is actually John 10:10, and it's a pretty common one. So I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up with my poor paraphrasing. So it says, the thief, which is another word for the enemy, okay, cometh not but for to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Okay? And in Greek, the word destroy means render useless. Okay? But I am come, this is Jesus speaking, I am come that they may have life, and they may have it more abundantly. And the word abundantly in Greek stands for beyond. Okay? And my guess is when John got downloaded with all the revelation, that was beyond his wildest imagination that he would ever receive that kind of information. So we could also say this: fear comes and steals, kills, and destroys, renders us useless in many situations. But when love shows up, it gives us more life, it brings flow, it brings peace, it brings joy, for uncaused joy, okay? And so this again is looking at those two opposites that we're living in, okay? So here's the thing. Both love and fear have the same agenda, okay? And what I mean by that is that, thy kingdom come on earth, right? Love wants to manifest the kingdom and grow the kingdom on earth. And guess what? Fear wants to grow the matrix on earth. Love and fear both want to grow their own organizations, let's call them. How do they do it? They have to do it through us. They have to manifest through us. We are what they use. They come into us, and then we express them into the world, and now we're either got love spewing out of us, or we've got fear spewing out of us, and their kingdoms, the kingdom and the matrix, are progressing, okay? So, our soul, ourselves, our soul, is a hot commodity. Okay? So I'd like you to look at somebody and say, you are a hot commodity. Okay? Just turn to your neighbor and say, you're a hot commodity. And you people at home, you are a hot commodity. Both love and fear is out to get you. Okay? It wants you. It needs you. Okay? And I hadn't really thought about that before. It's like, that's very interesting. Okay? So let's look at how this happens. So this is my amazing drawing, okay? And so this is spirit at the top, right? The little circle is our soul, and this is our body at the bottom, okay? And so at the soul level, like I was mentioning earlier, we have the spirit of love, we have the spirit of fear, and we have our personal spirit, okay? And so they're all just intermingling at that level. Can the people at home see that, Michael?
Yeah.
Oh, good. That's great. And so I'm letting the green and the pluses represent the spirit of love, the positives, and the red and the negative represent the energy of fear. So we've got positive energy, negative energy, which we've spoken about. Okay. So they come right to the edge of soul. And soul I've got in a circle because there is a bit of, remember, it's starting to condense, it's starting to form. So there's some kind of shape to it. There's something, like water has a certain, even though water flows, it still has form, it still has a shape, okay? And so the way that spirit, the only way that spirit can move into soul is through something called theta brainwaves. Okay? So I'm going to take a little segue just to talk about theta. And then I'll come back to that other picture. So there's many brain waves, but these are the four most common that we move through in a daily cycle. So beta is what most of us are in right now because we're thinking, we're processing, we're trying to learn something, driving a car, that kind of thing. So it's a very most alert state. Alpha is just a step down. We're more a little bit drifty, maybe daydreaming, or just, kind of just walking around, maybe having a bath or something, okay? And then delta at the bottom is when we're sleeping or unconscious, it's very deep. So the top two are awake, the bottom one is asleep. And theta is that permeable state right in the middle, okay? You're not fully awake, but you're not fully asleep either, okay? So it's a particular frequency. So when are we in theta? Well, we go through theta every day in the morning when we wake up, when we're just in that kind of hazy, fuzzy place, and at night, when we're just falling asleep, we're moving from beta, we're probably in alpha, and then we're not fully asleep, but we're not really awake anymore. We're in that phase, okay? Children up to the age of 6 or 7, when we were just little tykes, spend most of their time in theta. So they're wide open. And that's why when trauma happens when we're children, it's really impactful, okay? We're also in theta as adults if we're presented with anything frightening. Okay? I saw an interesting study where they put all these electrodes on the people's heads, and then they would just flash them pictures of something horrific or horrifying, and they'd look at it, immediately theta would pop up. Okay? And I think that's part of, because the third part of the fight or flight is freeze. If you can't fight, you can't run, they're sitting there hooked up to something, then it's like that deer in the headlights frozen state where they're kind of suspended, because theta is like a suspended state. You're just sort of in mid-stride. You're just kind of there, but you're not in either camp totally. Okay? We can also intentionally go into theta when we're meditating, okay? When we're praying. Okay? And so when you want to connect with spirit, it's very good to go into theta. That's the frequency that you want to access in order for you to dock in with theta. Okay? And so like anything else, theta itself is just a brainwave. Okay? So it has an upside and downside like everything. But at the soul level, remember we're in free will zone, right? So we've got both positive and negative energy coming at us. However, because of free will, it can't actually permeate our soul without our permission. Okay? So how do we give it permission? We give it through agreeing with it. We give it through push subscribe. If it seems the thought comes in, seems like a good idea, go, yeah, I think that's agreement. Boom, in it comes. By opening the door, agreeing with, weighing into, pushing subscribe, and whether we've done it through innocence or ignorance or willfully, it's still given it legal right to come into our soul and start working. Okay? So, and that's the problem with when children are in theta and they don't, or people don't understand how this is working, then they can be held captive. Remember the first week, they said, my people will be held captive without knowledge. A lot of people don't understand this. Okay? They don't understand that they're saying yes and allowing this negative in at a soul level. Okay? So I'm going to give you a concrete example. When I was a little girl, my mother stayed home with me 24/7, so we were very much enmeshed until I was about somewhere 2.5 or 3 years old. And then she decided to start her own business, which was great and good for her, and as an adult I understand that, but as a child, it's just, Mummy's gone, and I'm with my 80-some-year-old grandfather. So the first day, that's my first memories, I was just shocked. Where's Mummy, where's Mummy, where's Mummy? And I didn't understand she's at work, which didn't mean anything to me. The next day I was just crying and hanging onto her leg, and Grandpa's pulled me off, and she was like, Arr. And the next day I was mad, and I'm just hammering on her. And then by the fourth day, I remember I was sitting on the stairs, I wouldn't say goodbye to her, and I distinctly remember thinking, my mother doesn't love me. And I've always thought that I made that up as a 3-year-old, okay? What I've come to understand in the last few years that I've been studying this, where do these thoughts come from? Because I always knew that thoughts create emotion, create sensations in the body, but I hadn't really asked myself, yeah, but where did that thought come to begin with? I just thought I made it up. A 3-year-old or 2.5-year-old child cannot make up an abstract thought like that, okay? We don't even have the abstract thinking apparatus until we're about 12 years old. We're concrete thinkers. The brain has not developed enough to generate that thought. But what I've come to understand is that was traumatic for me. I was scared, I didn't know what was going on, and that's where the enemy, the negative energy is right at the door, right at the side of the soul saying, oh, your mother doesn't love you. And that somehow made sense, and I went, oh. And I said yes to it, out of complete innocence. I had no idea, but it made sense for the situation. So that's how innocently we can say yes to it, okay? And so once it's in the soul, then if we start thinking about it, and we start ruminating on it, meditating on it, yeah, she doesn't love me, and it starts to grow, yeah, and I'm not wanted, and I'm not worthwhile, I'm not good enough, and why didn't she want me, and just even that same one over and over again, then another system kicks in, because remember, the mind is at the soul level, okay? The short-term memories in the soul, it comes in we choose it, comes in, then if we think about it over and over again, there's a process called protein synthesis. And you're welcome to Google it. There's all kinds of information about it. Protein synthesis transfers that thought, my mother doesn't love me, into an actual hardwiring in the brain. It goes from the short-term memory in the mind, at the soul level, into the long-term memory in the brain, okay, in the body. And so it's transferred by something they call nanopoodles, because I guess they have their little curly things that actually transfer this bit by bit. So it's like it downloads it from the soul into the body, into the brain. But it's been going around in the mind for a little bit first, okay? And so I think of it sometimes as, have you ever watched ants move a pile of dirt? They go zip, 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 zip. That's kind of how I see it. It just gets downloaded. And when it goes into the brain, then on a nerve cell, a little dendrite starts to grow. So this is a picture. I'll show it you guys. So this is one with lots of branches on it, and this is not very many. Okay. So these are called dendrites, and they grow out of nerve cells. This is what our thoughts literally look like in our brain. It's how they are held, okay? Or you might think of them as, ta-da, okay? So we could think of these as love-based dendrites and these as fear-based dendrites in our literal brain, okay? And so, of course, the ratio of love-based dendrites to fear-based dendrites in our brain is going to have a huge impact on our lives, right? A huge impact. So, thoughts literally become flesh. I mean, think about the Word becomes flesh. That's what they said about Jesus. And the Word became flesh. Well, guess what? Our words, my mother doesn't love me, literally formed a dendrite in my brain. And then, because like attracts like, then it attracted more thoughts like that. Oh, maybe I'm not lovable, maybe nobody likes me. And so it starts to grow. Pretty soon I'm in the garden eating worms, right? So it starts to grow, right? For better or for worse, remember this works for both. This is a system that is non-prejudice to positive versus negative. It just is how either one of them get in our brain, right? So obviously the positive are life-giving, the negative are life-draining. And so then as we age and something happens and that thought gets triggered, those the synapses and so on in the dendrites get triggered, and because it's appearing in my head, I think it's my thought. Well, it's mine now, but it's not, but it wasn't originally. All this negative junk that we've got in our heads did not belong to us originally. It came from out there. It came from the source of evil, negative, darkness, call it what you will. And now it's in my head. And that's the craziness of it, is once it's been planted, that energy can just go off and bother somebody else, because now I'm running the program. Because I believe what I think. And I know in my office I've got this little sign that says, don't believe everything you think. And if you learn nothing else from me but that, okay, it'll change your life. Because I can't tell you the number of people that they'll tell me something and I'll say, well, is that true? He said, well, I believe it. And I said, just because you believe something does not make it true. Bless you. And it's like, what? Because we think if we believe it, it's true. It's not. So it's time that we all started taking a real serious look at these thoughts in our brain. Okay? So I want to be very clear that our ability to choose and think actually has the power, okay, to choose and think in our mind at the soul level, has the power to redesign our brain in the body. Okay, it has the ability to restructure the brain, to change the design of the landscape. It has the power to literally create matter. So the mind is not over over matter. We say mind over matter. Yes, mind is not only over matter, mind creates matter. That's how amazing this mind of ours is. I think next to God, it's the most powerful thing in the universe. And no one's taught us how to run the darn thing. Like most of us, it's running us until we get some separation from it, which is the teaching tip from last week. We looked at witnessing this mind and all the stuff in it, okay? And so but for us to realize how powerful it is. And I know after I first kind of learned this, it really impacted me as to how important it is to keep my mind focused on positive, focused on good things, healthy things. Because I realized, whoa, I want my mind to be, I want my brain to have nice, green, leafy, health-giving dendrites, okay? And so I can actually do my part by focusing on good, positive, kind, compassionate, caring, love-based. By choosing love, I can actually grow more healthy dendrites in my brain. And once I realized, because I always thought it was a nice idea, kind of a moral thing, oh, be nice, choose love, da-da-da, isn't it great? But once I realized that it actually impacts the dendrites in my brain at that level, that's when I got really serious about disciplining my mind and saying, no, if it starts running off down here and complaining or being bitter or angry, no, back here, you're going to think about this. And so that's a lot of what we've been doing so far in the series, right? Saying, no, turn around and think of something positive, okay? You'll see, and that's most of the teaching tips that we do will have that flavor into it, because that's the key. Saying, I am not going down that road anymore, and turning around and saying, I choose love. And I'm going to not pay any attention to that, because the really good news is that neurons, the half-life of neurons is about 1 week. So every week that you don't use that particular pathway, half of them disappear. And so, or atrophy, whatever. So, if you have 100 neurons holding this thought in place, after a week, only 50 of them. After a week, there's only 25. After a week, there's 12 and a half and 6 and a quarter, and so on. If we don't activate them by thinking about it. And now that's challenging, but that's where our work is. That's where the work is. And so it's like if you're driving down this highway of love and you're really aligned, and then all of a sudden you find yourself going off an exit that's going to fear, right? You need to slam on the brakes, back out of it before you get too far down, and get yourself back on the road. And because if you keep going, you're going to activate the system, and it's like, oh, here we go again. Now I've just fed it. We've got to be careful what we feed, and we feed it with our attention. We feed it with the commiseration. Okay? So, okay. So for our teaching tip today, then our choosing love tip is, I'll go through the sentences, and then we'll, as a group, do it, and I'll let the people at home do it on their own. So what we're going to do, I've called it reclaiming our goods. or goodies, whatever works best for you. And so the first thing I'm going to ask you to answer the question, what did the thief or the enemy or fear, whichever word works better for you, what did fear steal, kill, or destroy from your life? Okay, and you can relate it to this initial one or not. And I'm looking for things like motivation, self-worth, self-esteem, confidence. What happened that the thieves got in there and stole that from you like it did for me? Thinking your mother doesn't love you. Oh, and that's the other thing. When you have that thought, it creates a filter. So anything she would do to show me love got filtered out. And the second she would say, oh, you go play, it would like, see, there, proof, right? That's how it works in our brain. Thoughts create filters, and we can only let in what agrees with it, and then it keeps it growing. Okay, that's a bit of an aside. The second question is, what fear-based lies did you choose, underline choose, to believe that caused this problem? So let's say I have a lack of confidence. Well, what was the fear-based lie? Could have been my mother didn't love me. It could be I'm not good enough, right? So let's say that. So then you're going to write down what lie did you choose to believe? Because remember, this is a choice thing. And it's really important to get it, because if we think we didn't have choice, then we're playing victim. And I get as a little kid, we didn't know we had choice. But at some level, we still said yes, okay? And then the third thing is to write exactly the opposite. So if my statement was, I'm not good enough, the exact opposite would be, I am good enough. And then you would add find at least 3 or as many reasons as you want that are true that you are good enough. And the statement would look like, the truth is, I am good enough to have gone to university. I am good enough to have been married and had children. I'm good enough to learn how to drive a car. They don't have to be huge, but just anything that can really support, that are true, that represent that I am good enough, okay? And then we're going to do in class, and I'd invite you guys at home to actually, we're going to repeat them over and over again. Because remember, once it gets from the soul, the way it gets from the soul into the brain is through repetition. Meditating, ruminating, focusing on, and so on. I mean, think about if somebody gives you a phone number, and you don't have a piece of paper, and you want to remember it, you go, 922-4267, 922-4267, 922-42, until you can either remember it or get to a piece of paper. Well, if we want to grow, these lovely ones, if we actually want to grow dendrites in our brain so that this is a bigger forest than the nasty ones, we need to find some kind of life-affirming statement that's opposite to the one that we have been running, and really focus on it and say it out loud and go over it. Say it when we're driving. I am good enough. No, the truth is I am good enough. I'm good enough to have graduated. I'm good enough to have done this. I'm good enough to have done that. Right? And it's going to take a few weeks to get these growing, about 3 weeks. Okay, but the idea is if we ignore the other ones and we keep this growing, then we change the ratio in our literal brains of love-based, life-affirming dendrites versus fear-based, life-draining dendrites. So I wish you well, the folks at home. That's as much as we're going to do this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. And God bless, enjoy. Oh, and if you ever want to email me, it's just my name, joannashandrew@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you. Good night.